Have you ever noticed how, when the news talk about a suspect, they often show you this picture? But for another suspect, they show you this one? That's not a coincidence. It's a pattern. And it's one of several subtle tricks the news uses that might be secretly making you racist. Without you even realizing it, you could be forming racial biases, and your daily news habit might be the main reason why. What if the way the news is reported, the words, the pictures, is training your brain to connect certain races with crime? Now, this isn't about pointing fingers at journalists or calling you a racist. Not at all. This is about understanding a system. It's about seeing the subtle, often unconscious patterns in our media diet that have a huge, measurable impact on how we see the world and each other. We're going to look at the psychology behind it, the hard data that proves it's real, and most importantly, what you can do to build an immunity. Because once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them. To really get how deep this goes, we need to treat this like an investigation. Let's look at 4 key exhibits. For techniques the media uses that, piece by piece, build a biased picture reality. Exhibit A, the power of imagery, the mugshot versus the family photo. Let's start with the most powerful tool the media has, the photograph. A picture isn't just worth 1,000 words. It's a shortcut straight to our emotions and biases. When a crime is committed, the news needs a photo. Where they get it and which one they pick is a decision with massive consequences. And study after study reveals a disturbing trend. When a suspect is black, news outlets are far more likely to use a mugshot. A report from the Equal Justice Initiative found that mugshots were used in coverage of 45% of cases with black defendants, but only 8% of cases with white defendants. Think about what a mugshot screams. The lighting is harsh. The person is at their absolute lowest. Scared, angry, maybe disheveled. They're stripped of their humanity, framed by the sterile background of a police station. The image itself screams criminal, reinforcing presumption of guilt before a trial even starts. As law professor Jennifer L. Eberhardt puts it, seeing so many mugshots creates an illusory correlation for viewers, feeding racial bias and making it seem like black and brown men are far more prone to crime than they actually are. Now, contrast that with the pictures often used for white suspects in similar or even identical crimes. Suddenly, professional headshots pop up, smiling photos from a family vacation, a high school yearbook picture. These images do the exact opposite of a mugshot. They humanize the person. They show them as a student, a father, a member of a community. The subtext is clear. This person had a life, a future. The crime is framed as a shocking detour from a normal life. For the black suspect, the mugshot implies the crime was an inevitability, the fulfillment of a stereotype. This isn't just a feeling. It's a psychological trick. Using a mugshot can trigger what's known as unconscious transference. We take the negative feelings about the crime and transfer them onto the face we see, turning that face into a symbol of the threat itself. A Stanford study confirmed this, finding that when white participants saw a disproportionate number of black mugshots, they were more likely to support harsher criminal justice policies. The images weren't just telling a story. They were shaping public policy by stirring up fear. Some newsrooms are slowly starting to change. Outlets like the Houston Chronicle and Gannett have stopped publishing mugshot galleries, admitting they were often just for clicks, not to inform. But the practice is still widespread, a constant low-level hum in our media, reinforcing the dangerous and false narrative that crime has a color. Exhibit B, the language of crime, words at wound. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, the actual words reporters choose are just as powerful and just as biased. The language in crime reporting doesn't just describe, it tells us how to feel. And just like with photos, there's a clear double standard. From the moment of arrest, the language used can begin a process of dehumanization. Words like suspect and detainee are standard, but the media often goes further. This is where you see a stark racial split. Take the word thug. It might seem like a generic term for a violent person, but in the media, it's used as deeply racialized and disproportionately aimed at black men and boys, a modern stand-in for older, more explicit slurs. When white kids get into a fight at a game, they're rowdy fans. When black kids do the same, the word thug almost always makes an appearance in the headline. It's a coded appeal to stereotypes that paint black men as inherently aggressive. This applies to other labels, too. A young black person in a crime story might be called a super predator, a 90s term meant to conjure an animalistic, remorseless criminal. A white teen who does the same thing is often a troubled youth from a good family. One erases any chance of redemption. The other practically begs for empathy. One is an identity. The other is just a phase. This is all about something called person-first language, or really the lack of it. There's a big difference between calling someone a felon and a person with felony conviction. The first is a permanent brand. The second is an action in their past. The media rarely applies this idea fairly. One study found that news stories were 50% more likely to mention a white defendant by name than a black defendant, who is often left as a nameless racial descriptor. Even the way crime itself is described is loaded. Research shows that news reports often script crimes using stereotypes based on white fear of black crime. For example, when a white person is a victim of a crime committed by a person of color, the story is often told with dramatic language that amps up the sense of interracial threat. But here's a fact. The vast majority of violent crime in the U.S. is intraracial. It happens between people of the same race. You'd never know that from watching the news. One study found that while only 10% of victims in actual crime reports were whites victimized by black individuals, these cases made up a whopping 42% of televised stories. This isn't reality. It's a narrative of racial threat, and it's being manufactured. Exhibit C. The numbers don't lie. Overrepresentation. So far we've seen the images and the words. Now, let's look at the hard numbers. This is where subtle bias becomes a stark mathematical fact. In local and national news, black Americans are consistently and dramatically overrepresented as criminals when compared to actual arrest rates. To be clear, this isn't about whether black people commit crimes. It's about the huge gap between reality and the picture of crime the media paints. Study after study confirms this. One foundational study found that in Los Angeles, black people were significantly overrepresented as criminals on TV news compared to official crime data. At the same time, white individuals were overrepresented as the police officers making the arrests. This created a powerful visual story. Black people as the source of crime, and white people as the source of order. This isn't just an LA problem. A Media Matters analysis of New York City news found that local stations named black people as suspects in major crime stories far more often than their actual arrest rates from the NYPD. The Sentencing Project has found that the public consistently overestimates the proportion of crime committed by black people by 20 to 30%. Why? Because their media diet is feeding them a distorted picture. As one report put it, African Americans are nearly 4 times more likely to be represented as criminals than police officers on television news. This overrepresentation works on 2 levels. First, it follows the old news motto, if it bleeds, it leads. Crime stories are cheap, easy, and they grab attention by triggering fear. But it's more than a ratings game. This constant drumbeat strengthens a mental shortcut in our brains between black and crime. It's a psychological principle called cultivation theory. The idea is that the more time you spend in the media's world, the more you believe that world reflects reality. So when the news constantly shows you black faces connected to crime, your brain, an efficient pattern recognized machine, starts to build that shortcut. It creates an implicit bias. This isn't about you being a bad person. It's about your brain doing what it's designed to do, learn from repetition. When you're fed a skewed pattern day after day, your brain learns it. Exhibit D, the victim-perpetrator flip. Our final exhibit is maybe the most insidious. It's not just about who is shown as a criminal, but also about who is shown as a victim. The news doesn't just overrepresent black people as criminals. It underrepresents them as victims. This creates a skewed moral universe where white lives seem more grievable and white safety is the top priority. Let's go back to the data. While most murders in the U.S. happen between people of the same race, the media makes it seem like crimes by people of color against white victims are far more common. Research shows news outlets are more drawn to stories with white victims. This selective coverage doesn't just distort reality, it devalues the lives of black victims. Their stories are told less often and with less emotional detail. A report by the Equal Justice Initiative put this in stark numbers. It found that white victims were nearly 4 times more likely than black victims to have a photo with friends or family shown in the news. This simple choice is incredibly powerful. A photo of a victim smiling with loved ones makes you feel for them by not giving black victims the same humanizing treatment. The media sends a quiet but clear message about whose lives matter more. This empathy gap shows up in how stories are framed. When a white person is killed, especially by a person of color, the coverage focuses on their innocence and potential. But when a black person is a victim, the story is often complicated with details that subtly imply blame. Their past criminal record might be brought up. Their neighborhood might be called crime-ridden. Even in cases of police violence, the victim's behavior is scrutinized, suggesting they might be responsible for their own death. This racial threat narrative, with minorities as perpetrators and whites as victims, cultivates fear, not just of crime, but of black people themselves. That fear then drives public support for punitive policies that disproportionately harm black communities. The combined effect of these 4 exhibits creates a media reality where your brain is methodically trained to make one connection: crime equals black. So why does this happen? Is there some secret memo telling newsrooms to make black people look bad? No. The reality is more complicated, and in some ways, more troubling. This isn't a conspiracy. It's a system running on ingrained habits, economic pressure, and a serious lack of diversity. First, the business model. If it bleeds, it leads. Our brains are wired with negativity bias. We pay more attention to threats than to good news. News outlets, fighting for your attention, exploit this. Crime stories are a cheap, reliable way to hook viewers with fear, and fear keeps people watching. Second, this pressure combines with the path of least resistance. Journalists are on tight deadlines. The easiest source for info and images is the police. They provide press releases, statements, and mugshots. By relying almost exclusively on official sources, newsrooms often just echo the perspective of law enforcement. It takes more time and effort to find a family photo or to add context beyond the police report. Efficiency often beats nuance. Third, and maybe most important, is a staggering lack of diversity in newsrooms. The American Society of News Editors hoped newsrooms would reflect U.S. diversity by the year 2000. They failed. They set a new goal for 2025, which they are also on track to miss. A recent Reuters Institute report found that only 17% of top editors in the U.S. are people of color. This matters because the people in the room, the reporters, producers, and editors deciding what's a story and how to frame it, influence everything. A mostly white newsroom is more likely to have blind spots. They might rely on stereotypes because they lack the first-hand experience to question them. They might not realize thug is a loaded word or understand the dehumanizing power of a mugshot. It's not necessarily malice. It's a failure of perspective. Finally, there's history. The link between blackness and criminality is one of the oldest and deepest stereotypes in America. The media, rather than fighting this bias, often finds it easier and more profitable to reflect it back to an audience already primed to accept it. Put it all together. A business model that loves fear, a reliance on police sources, a lack of diversity, and deep-seated cultural stereotypes. And you get the system we have now. It doesn't need a conspiracy to produce racist outcomes. It just needs everyone to follow the path of least resistance. So are we helpless? Is there anything we can do? Absolutely. The solution isn't to stop consuming news. It's to become a more critical, conscious consumer. It's about developing media literacy, which is like building an immunity to the biases we've been talking about. It comes down to a few simple habits. First, question the imagery. Every time you see a crime story, look at the photo. Is it a mugshot or a family photo? Ask yourself, what emotion is this image trying to get from me? Is it humanizing or dehumanizing? Once you start noticing this pattern, its power over you fades. You can separate the facts from the emotional manipulation. Second, analyze the language. Pay attention to the words used. Are they loaded terms like thug or illegal alien? Or are they using neutral, person-first language like a person who entered the country without authorization? Is the person named? Or are they just a nameless black male? Language is a choice. Questioning it helps you see the narrative being pushed. Don't just read the story. Decode it. Third, diversify your news sources. If you only get your news from one or two mainstream sources, you're getting a narrow, likely warped view of the world. Make an effort to broaden your intake. Seek out independent outlets, especially those run by and for people of color. Read international news to get an outside perspective. Create your own diverse media ecosystem to fact-check the dominant narratives in real time. Finally, seek out the data. Don't let news stories shape your entire understanding of crime. If you feel yourself becoming more fearful, look up the actual crime statistics for your city from sources like the Department of Justice or the FBI. Is there really a spike in crime or just a spike in crime coverage? Arming yourself with facts is the ultimate antidote to fear. The news holds up a mirror to society, but that mirror is often warped. It reflects a distorted image where criminality is a color. Fear is currency, and subtle patterns quietly shape our most basic perceptions of each other. This isn't about blaming you for biases you didn't know you were picking up. It's about revealing the machinery that creates them. By understanding the power of an image, the way of a word, and the systemic pressures that drive it all, we can start to dismantle that machinery in our own minds. Being a conscious consumer of news isn't passive. It's an act of resistance. It's a commitment to seeing the world as it is, not just as it's presented to us. It's about reclaiming our own perception so that our views are shaped not by fear and stereotypes, but by facts, empathy, and a critical awareness of the stories we're told. The training is optional. The first step to opting out is simply to see it for what it is. Subscribe to this channel and share this knowledge with others. Together, we can build a media literate society that values facts, empathy, and fairness over fear and bias.